Indigenous Peoples and Local Communities in the IPBES Assessment of Invasive Alien Species, which is being organized by the Network of the Centers of Distinction on Indigenous and Local Knowledge, IPBES, and UNESCO. My name is Peter Bates. I work in the Technical Support Unit on Indigenous and Local Knowledge for IPBES, and I'll be taking you through this webinar today. So just to get us started, to make sure that everybody is set up properly, we do have interpretation today, which is available in English, French, and Spanish. So if you want to make use of the interpretation, please do go to the globe icon on the bottom of your screen, and there you should be able to select either English, Spanish, or French. So even if you're an English speaker, please do select the English channel because some people may be speaking in different languages, and that'll be translated through to you. If you have any problems doing that, just let us know in the chat and we can try to help you out. And then just some very quick notes on engagement. Please self-mute when you're not making an intervention to reduce background noise. If you want to ask a question or comment, please do so in the chat function, and we'll be keeping an eye on that and trying to answer as many of your questions and respond to as many comments as possible. And everything you write will be really useful for us because we will then use the chat after the session. And we're recording this meeting with the aim of it being a publicly available resource. So the idea is that eventually it will be online in English, French, and Spanish so that it's a resource for anybody who is interested in this subject. Okay, so then it is my pleasure to move to our opening. We've had a slight change in the lineup here. Prazet unfortunately wasn't able to join due to connection issues. So Lynn Jacobs from Kahnawake in Canada has kindly said that she will give us some opening words. So Lynn, I pass the floor over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Just for the interpreters, I'll speak in my language for a moment. Kanjokwaze waduhusias katnigari wesa negadi ohandagari wadeko angwano hetstu. Aguego askandi dua wehnuni neungwa nigora deno de tinuwaradu neungwesua. Togadi neutuna nigora. Aguego askandi dua wehnuni neungwa nigora deno de tinuwaradu ne yukitni staha diohunzade. Dano agwe dinahoda desungwawi. De tinuarado oni ne gundirio, dano ne oni ne ojida ogun ojinua sua, dano agwe dinahoda di to ne yunkinista di hunzade. Doga teno sunget ni gorha, izigine yaze wada sudara, togadi na yotunugwa ni gorha. So this morning, I offered a very short and brief opening. I'm a bit out of practice with my language, unfortunately, but I was willing to just offer some words when Peter asked at this few minutes ago. In our language, what we do is we offer thanks to all the different parts of creation, all the way from our mother, the earth, the grasses, the roots, the medicines, the foods, all the way up through the trees, the birds, the insects, our grandmother, the moon, our elder brother, the sun, and everything that exists on this planet and in the universe, and all the way up to the creator. All of the different parts of creation, we are grateful to them, and we offer our respect and gratitude for everything that they do to continue fulfilling the cycles of life. And so this morning, I'm very honored to have offered some words to open this session, and thank everyone for all of the good work that they continue to do to honor all of our relatives in the natural world.
Thank you so much, Lynn, for starting the meeting off in such an appropriate and special way. And I think that's those words can carry us through the next 2 hours. So thank you so much for doing that. Next, we have another slight change to the schedule. Joji Carino from the Centers of Distinction on ILK was going to say some opening words. Unfortunately, she's been caught up in meetings. So Maria Elena Ripala, also from the Centers of Distinction, has kindly offered to say a welcome for the Centers of Distinction. So Maria Elena, pass the floor to you.
Hello, good evening to everyone, and good day. In behalf of the Centers of Distinction on Indigenous and Local Knowledge, we would like to welcome everyone to this webinar on Indigenous and Local Knowledge in the IPBES assessment of invasive alien species and their control. We hope that in this webinar, our understanding of Indigenous peoples and local communities our understanding really would be deepened, especially the perspectives of Indigenous communities in relation to invasive alien species. Again, we welcome everyone to this webinar tonight and at different time zones in different parts of the world. Good evening.
Thank you so much, Maria Elena, and we really appreciate working with you on this webinar. It's been excellent so far. And then last but not least, it's my pleasure to pass the floor to David Abura, who is the chair of IPBES, who will also say some opening words. David, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Peter. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody on the call. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a bit windy here, so let me know if you hear the wind in my microphone. So it's really a great pleasure for me as chair of IPBES now to welcome you to this webinar on Indigenous peoples and local communities and the IPBES assessment of invasive alien species and their control. As many of you know, IPBES has long recognized the important role that Indigenous peoples and local communities play in understanding, managing, and governing biodiversity and nature. Work with Indigenous peoples and local communities to incorporate their varied knowledge is a central pillar of IPBES and one that is important to me. I started my career on coral reefs in East Africa, working with small-scale fishing communities to map and document their knowledge and use of reefs. As you will hear over the next 2 hours, the assessment followed a rigorous approach to working with Indigenous and local knowledge and to ensuring participation by Indigenous peoples and local communities. We're profoundly grateful to all of the members of Indigenous peoples and local communities who participated as authors, as contributing authors, dialogue workshop participants, or contributors of materials and review comments. This work would not be possible without your support. I also wish to acknowledge the work of the Centers of Distinction on Indigenous and Local Knowledge. As you will hear, they also ran activities on invasive alien species during the assessment period with the aim of documenting community knowledge on this important subject. In this way, and with thanks to the assessment author team for all their hard work, this assessment was able to consider and highlight how IPLCs perceive invasive alien species, how they are impacted by them, and also, crucially, how the knowledge, values, and governance systems may be used to manage and adapt to this challenge. As such, the assessment provides clear options for action for governments and decision makers at all scales, which highlight the importance of recognizing and working with Indigenous people and local communities and their knowledge, management, and governance systems. We hope that this webinar will help to ensure that IPLCs are able to benefit from this work. During the webinar, we will highlight key findings from the assessment and hear reflections from Indigenous peoples and members of local communities about how invasive alien species impact them and how they are managing this challenge on their lands and waters. So I want to thank you all for joining the webinar, and I'm sure you'll have fascinating discussions over the next 2 hours. I'll hand back to you, Peter. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much for that, David. We really appreciate you being here with us. Great. So now it's also my pleasure to pass the floor to Yesenia Hernandez, who is one of the members of our IPBES Task Force on Indigenous and Local Knowledge. And she's just going to briefly take us through the aims and the agenda of the workshop today. So Yesenia, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Peter. Padiush, good morning to everyone. Yes, I will share with you the aims of this webinar. And the first is to introduce the findings of the assessment. And second is to reflect on how these findings can be useful for Indigenous peoples and local communities. And next, we will to hear the IPLC experience around invasive alien species and to discuss the links with policy making. As you know, IPBES assessments are critical for policy making. So as one example is the global assessment, and support to support the process of ensuring that IPLCs benefit from the assessment for the messages, the findings and all the information. Next, please. And we have the agenda. Of course, we have the great opening welcome and the presentation of the assessment by the authors and the co-chairs. And now, and after that, we will go to a discussion. And we will have presentations from our brothers and sisters, IPLCs, on invasive alien species. And the next is a discussion between the authors and co-chairs and us. And finally, the closing. Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you so much, Yesenia. Okay, so just very quickly before we move on to the background to IPBES and our work with Indigenous and local knowledge, I can see that lots of you are writing in the chat saying where you're from and saying hello to everybody. So please do keep doing that. It really helps us to see who's participating and who's involved. So please, if you haven't already written in the chat saying hello and where you're from and where you're working, please do so. Great. And then now it's my pleasure to pass over to Wilfredo Alangui, who is going to take us through the background to IPBES and our work with Indigenous and local knowledge and Indigenous peoples and local communities. Willie, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Peter. Good evening, everyone. Good evening from the Philippines, northern part of the Philippines, actually. So I'm Wilfredo, a Kankanay Igorot, and a professor of mathematics at the University of the Philippines in Baguio City. So it's my pleasure to talk to you about IPBES and its work with Indigenous and local knowledge and Indigenous peoples and local communities. IPBES stands for the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, which is an independent intergovernmental body established by member states in 2012. It currently has 146 member countries. The overall objective of IPBES is to strengthen the science policy interface for the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, long-term human well-being, and sustainable development. Next slide, please. Probably the most important products from IPBES are the assessments, which bring together multidisciplinary teams, including IPLCs, to work on a specific topic as a way of providing a knowledge base for decision makers at all scales. So here in the slide, you can see the different IPBES assessments. I will no longer read all of them. Assessments of pollinators and pollination, as well as the well-received
I think, unfortunately, Wilfredo's internet is cutting out.
Yeah, hello, sorry.
There you go, you're back.
Am I back?
Yes.
Yeah. Can you hear me clearly?
Now we can hear you clearly, yes.
Okay, sorry. So I think I was talking about the big global assessment that was released in 2019, right? And then, of course, we have ongoing assessments that include the nexus of biodiversity, water, food, and health, as well as transformative change. And today, we're going to talk about the assessment of invasive alien species and their control, which was completed last year. Next slide, please. So let me talk about IPBES and ILK. Since it was created in 2012, IPBES has recognized the importance of indigenous and local knowledge systems to the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and nature. These ILK systems include values, worldviews, philosophies, management, and governance systems. Work with ILK is enshrined in IPBES deliverables and objectives. As well as working with ILK, IPBES also recognizes that participation by IPLCs themselves is critical. IPBES has an ILK task force that was formed in 2014. It is a group of experts, many of whom are indigenous people, who developed and oversee methods in IPBES. And I am currently a member of the task force. There's also a technical support unit based at UNESCO in Paris, which is tasked with supporting our work at the TFILK. So far, the task force has developed an approach to recognizing and working with ILK, which was approved by member states in 2017, and also a methodological guidance. Both of these documents aim to guide and direct work with ILK and its activities to enhance the participation of IPLCs. This would include trying to ensure that IPLCs benefit from IPBES work. We recognize that there's still a lot more that could be done, and we're always developing our methods and learning through each new activity. So if you want to know more about IPBES and the task force on ILK, please visit our website, ipbes.net. So I think that's all for tonight. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you so much, Wilfredo. And it's great to have you. Wilfredo was on the task force originally. Then he wasn't for 4 years, and now he's back with us on the task force again. So we're very happy to have you working back with us again. Thank you so much for giving that introduction. Next, we're going to hear from Maria Elena Regpala again, who's going to introduce for us the Centers of Distinction on Indigenous and Local Knowledge and their work. Maria Elena.
Hello, good evening again. At this point in time, I would like to introduce the Centers of Distinction on Indigenous and Local Knowledge. The network is composed of Indigenous leaders, experts, professionals, and advocates of Indigenous and local knowledge. The network promotes the integrity and value of the knowledge of IPLCs, or Indigenous peoples and local communities, in science and policy. It was organized in 2016 during the 4th plenary meeting of IPBES in Malaysia. It hopes to build synergies with other IPLCs and institutions to widen reach and amplify their worldviews and knowledge. The Centers of Distinction on Indigenous and Local Knowledge is very much interested on invasive alien species. So much so that during the pandemic, the network held a webinar on IPLC's perspectives and experiences on invasive alien species. This was held in December 18, 2020. On the right of this slide, you will see the report of this webinar. It is a publication, and it is also available in our website. The website is indigenousknowledge.org. Thank you.
Great. So many thanks for that, Maria Elena. We really appreciate that background. I saw there was just a question in the question and answer about how people can join the Centers of Distinction on Indigenous and Local Knowledge. I don't know if you want to address that very quickly. Oh, I think maybe she didn't hear that question. So we can come back to that. We can come back to that later. There's also a network for Indigenous peoples and local communities connected to IPBES, which is called the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. And it's possible to register to join that network, which is a very open-ended network online on the IPBES website. So we can put those addresses in the chat for you. The Centers of Distinction, as I understand it, is more of a closed network with a membership. That's correct, Maria Elena? Great. I don't think she's hearing my questions, but we will come back to those. Okay, great. So thank you so much for giving us that background to the Centers of Distinction on Indigenous and Local Knowledge. And then next is the presentation on the assessment of invasive alien species and their control. So this is going to be presented by Peter Sturt, who is the co-chair of the assessment. So I'm happy to pass the floor over to you, Peter, for the presentation.
Thank you, Peter, and welcome to everyone. It's wonderful to see people from so many different parts of the world. My university is Ontario Tech University, which is in Ontario, Canada, and I'd just like to acknowledge that we exist on the lands of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation. So yeah, let's move into the presentation and try and move through this rather quickly, but I would of course encourage everyone to look at the longer version of the presentation, yes, but also the actual documents. And we'll identify some key messages of particular relevance to IPLC that comes from the assessment. So just keep moving along, Peter. I'll keep up with you. The assessment ran for 4 years, 2019 to 2023, and what a 4 years it was, right through the COVID pandemic, of course, which did have an impact insofar as our involvement with IPLC was concerned, although still very proud of the integration that we were able to achieve in this particular assessment. 3 co-chairs, myself, along with Annabelle Pouchard and Helen Roy, Annabelle from Chile and Helen from the UK. 86 experts, very diverse disciplinary backgrounds, from 49 different countries across all regions of the world. So the real emphasis here was on multidisciplinarity and regional inclusiveness. Next. So our main aim was to explore how invasive alien species affect nature and people globally. We were mandated this is how IPBES works. You are mandated by a previous meeting where the governments agree. And we were mandated to look at the current status and trends of IAS. I'll just say IAS from now on, it's quicker. Their impacts on people and nature, drivers and causes of IAS, and key management and policy options. So to some extent, this constituted our chapter structure. And we were tasked with the mandate to take into account various knowledge and value systems, including Indigenous and local knowledge. Next, please. Yeah. So how would we integrate ILK into this assessment? And there are numerous ways that IPBES does this in general, as was mentioned earlier, I think, by David and others. But basically, we would, of course, include authors and contributing authors who are ILK holders and experts if possible. This is not always easy to do because basically governments play a role in nominating, right, who the authors are. And this can lead to certain limitations I won't expand on now, but I think you're all familiar with. In each question, in each chapter, there would be key guiding questions that related to ILK. We held 3 ILK dialogue workshops for developing key themes, sharing knowledge, and reviewing and validating results. And I mentioned COVID previously. So we held our first dialogue workshop in person, which was hosted by the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity in Montreal. Lovely event, and got to meet so many people and hear from them. I think the next 2 dialogues workshops, however, were online, right, and facilitated largely by Peter at UNESCO, and these were just as productive, I think, right, but they weren't quite as personal, obviously. We had an online call for contributions to collect more material, and we conducted a review of literature and materials, and I think probably the most extensive review of literature ever conducted regarding ILK and IAS. And the results of that, of course, are found within the assessment itself. Next. So just a thank you for everyone who
Entonces
participated.
queremos agradecer a todos y todas que participaron en la evaluación.
Just to say, I think the Spanish came through for a moment there.
Yeah, either that or I've become very fluent in Spanish suddenly.
Yeah.
That'd be nice if that could happen. Just wanted to acknowledge and thank everyone who participated in the assessment. All the authors and contributing authors, dialogue workshop participants, groups and individuals, and reviewers. A big part of the IPBES process, and David didn't expand on this too much, but it's really to the credit of IPBES that the number of external reviews that we go through, and thousands and thousands of comments that we receive. So very helpful. Okay, let's move to the next then. So the finished assessment consists of a summary for policymakers available in 6 UN languages. And then the assessment itself, which is about 1,000 pages long, has 6 chapters: an introduction, where we help to define the field in various ways, trends and status, what's happening, where we're at right now, drivers that affect biological invasions, impacts, very lengthy and detailed, incredibly detailed chapters, all of these. Then a chapter on management, challenges, opportunities, lessons learned. And finally, chapter 6, which is on governance and policy options, which is, of course, what we hope governments take away with them when they're thinking about next steps. So, next slide. Okay, so what are the key messages that we found? And we just sort of summarize this, and we can keep moving on. So next slide, yeah. The summary for policymakers summarizes the key findings. This was approved by the IPBES member states at their 10th plenary meeting in Bonn in Germany, where all of our authors and the co-chairs, I think it was a 10-day event, but we got through it and managed to come up with the summary for policymakers, which was adopted by consensus by all 141 at the time, I think, members of IPBES. And there are 3 sections to this summary for policymakers. The first is on threats to nature, nature's contributions to people, and good quality of life. The second is on predictions for the future. And then another is on effective management. And finally, we again return to integrated governance as a theme. So next. So section A, the main headline is, and this won't surprise anyone, invasive alien species are a major threat to nature, nature's contributions to people, and good quality of life. And I'm going to assume that most people on this call understand what we mean by these terms. Nature's contributions to people, that's sometimes referred to as ecosystem services, although they're a slightly different concept. And good quality of life, it refers to basically the quality of human life to communities and individuals. Next. So the key messages: people and nature are threatened in all regions of Earth. Even, there's no area where you won't find invasive alien species providing a threat today to either to ecosystems or to people. Right? So this ranges all the way from Antarctica right up to the Arctic. Invasive alien species cause dramatic and in some cases irreversible damages to biodiversity, or changes, pardon me, to biodiversity and ecosystems. The economy, food security, water security, and human health are all profoundly and negatively affected by invasive alien species. And there were cases you could point out where invasive alien species provide food or what have you, or even increase in some cases biota, right? And but for the most part, I think it was 85% of the cases that we looked at, the impacts of invasive alien species have been negative, overwhelmingly negative impacts. Next. Now, this is very important, I think, in the context of looking at IPLC, that they can add to marginalization and inequity. They can make people that are facing an uphill battle with regard to survival in many cases and or political influence, other factors. It can make that uphill battle even harder. And in some contexts, there are gender and age differentiated impacts as well. When people have to go spend countless hours a day, for example, manually removing invasive weeds or what have you. So there are various examples that we use in the assessment about this. Overall, policies and their implementation by governments have been insufficient. It wouldn't be this big a global problem if they were sufficient in managing, preventing, and controlling invasive alien species. So the key message there is there's been tremendous progress that's been made regarding the management of invasive alien species, but there's also a tremendous amount of work to be done. Much more needs to be accomplished. Next. So good quality of life. We found that IIS overwhelmingly undermined them. There's limited research on gender relations in invasive alien species. There were some cases, as I mentioned before, that we were able to point out, but evidence of inequities and marginalization does exist. We give, for example, Lake Victoria, where artisanal fisheries, mainly involving men, declined due to an invasive alien plant, water hyacinth, which is probably the #1 invasive alien species in the world, causing depletion of tilapia fish. In East Africa, the prickly pear, which requires repeated weeding by hand, often by women and children in many cases. Now, this is their most time-consuming activity. And you can imagine spending hours and hours a day doing that, and then hours and hours a day, in some cases, bringing water back to the household and other chores like this. So it just makes a tough situation tougher, as I mentioned previously. Next. Many invasive alien species have been documented on lands managed, used, and are owned by IPLCs. We looked at more than 2,300 invasive alien species, which were documented on these lands, some negatively affecting quality of life and cultural identities. This came out in our workshops as well, that these species have an impact on culture because they are curtailing certain species which are often used in cultural activities, right? But also in economic activities and so on. And there were many examples of this. Indigenous lands in Oceania in North America have particularly high numbers, although that might be related to the tracking, right, and identification that's available. Right, so we did find more invasive species in some areas of the world than others, but I want to say this clearly: data collection is not equal across the world either, right? Their access to the needed resources is not equal in order to accurately track what's out there. Numbers of IAS are on average consistently lower on Indigenous lands compared to other lands. And I don't know if we put it in the slide, I don't think we did, but there's a new study which has just come out in, I believe it's in Nature, authored by several of our co-authors. It just came out, I think, yesterday or something that really reaffirms this. That, in fact, and this is a broader theme, obviously, that Indigenous peoples really know how to take care of their land and care for it. And we are finding that on average, there's consistently lower invasives in biological invasions taking place on this land. And this is heartening, and this is an obvious sign that we should be listening to what IPLCs have to say to us and learn from them. That's not always the case that they've been listened to, and that's one of the reasons we want to have webinars like this one. So next. Yeah, so perception is a big part of biodiversity conservation, right? And because not everyone sees things the same way, I think that's self-evident. And many IPLCs emphasize the interrelatedness of the land, water, and humans and other species. And this can lead to a range of diverse perceptions of specific invasive alien species. And so some IPLCs may consider an IAS a valued part of their nature over time. We saw some examples of this in Hawaii, for example, and other places. And there are also examples where IPLCs have created new income sources, often through necessity rather than choice. This we often refer to as adaptation or adaptive behavior. And this can lead to value conflicts around management. And of course, the worst case scenario is outsiders coming in and telling Indigenous people, that they have to do this because the science says so. What we need is cooperative collaboration on governance when it comes to these issues. So we stress that later in the assessment as well. Next. Again, most impacts are negative. Impacts on good quality of life, 68% negative impacts, 32% positive impacts. Okay, so this is as reported by IPLCs. The 85% figure I gave was a much broader global figure. But impacts on nature caused by invasive alien species, again, 92% negative impacts, right? So only 8% were perceived as positive. Next. Negative impacts include issues like this, reducing water security, limiting access to traditional lands, reducing mobility, requiring increased labor to manage, loss of traditional livelihoods, knowledge, and cultural practices. Again, I stress that. Impacts on autonomy, rights, cultural identity, often leading to general feelings of despair, sadness, and stress. So there's a psychological impact that takes place here. The use of IAS for food, fiber, income, or medicines can also cause negative impacts, especially where traditionally used native species have declined. Next. Globally, IAS are increasing rapidly and predicted to continue rising in the future. Next, yeah. So many human activities facilitate the transport, introduction, and establishment and spread of invasive alien species. We talk about them in the assessment. The threats are increasing markedly in all regions of Earth. The magnitude of the future threat is difficult to predict because of complex interactions and feedback, but we certainly can't predict it will keep increasing. Next. In section C, again, we're talking about invasive alien species and negative impacts. Management of invasive alien species. They can be prevented. They can be mitigated. Effective management is out there. There are all sorts of tools available. Right? It's a matter of using the right tools at the right time and making them available. Next. So we determined that yes, right, there are successful case studies, many of them, that can be reduced through management, prevention and preparedness by far. If there's one thing that comes out of this assessment that I stress over and over and over again, and I know my colleagues feel the same way. It's that prevention and preparedness are the most cost-effective options and are thus crucial moving forward. However, when prevention fails, when we do have a problem, then eradication has been successful in some cases, especially for small and slow-spreading populations. So the actual eradication of an invasive species from an area can raise problems because it usually involves basically killing those species, killing that population off. And this can raise problems, of course, when it comes to popular opinion, right? And you know, it's a difficult tightrope that's walked, I think, when it comes to the ability of governments to engage in this behavior. So it's absolutely essential that there's local community participation. Next. So failing prevention and eradication, then we switch to containment and control, right, which can also be effective in terrestrial and closed water systems, some lakes, rivers. It's very difficult to do in marine and what we call connected water systems. So this is a big distinction I don't have time to go into, but many invasive alien species are marine-based and can affect coastal areas, for example, on which indigenous people are dependent for food support sources. And these are really hard to control. They're hard to prevent, they're hard to control. Work needs to be done there as well. The recovery of ecosystem functions can be achieved, though, through adaptive management, including ecosystem restoration in terrestrial and closed water systems. Next. And engagement and collaboration, yes, I've already stressed this, right? It's very important that stakeholders and right holders are involved in the outcomes of management actions. Next. Okay, so how exactly are we looking at this? Many communities successfully manage invasive alien species already. To ensure the efficiency or the efficacy of management outcomes at the local level, it's vital that we engage in consultations with IPLCs through their free, prior, and informed consent. That's important across the board, but it's equally important in this issue area. Applying co-design principles for decision-making and action. Co-design being the key word there, right? Taking collaboration to that next level. Co-delivered biocultural management plans based on shared scientific, technical, and IOK systems. And such co-governance structures improve quality of life. We can argue for IPLCs, not just in terms of these species or dealing with invasive alien species, you know, but as general principles of governance. Next. Finally, we believe that ambitious progress to manage biological invasions can be achieved, but it's going to take more integrated governance to get it done. Next. As you see the horses, by the way, in the background, and this is one of those issues that really causes a lot of public concern, right, about culling horses, for wild horses, for example. But we can come back to that later in the discussions, probably. So integrated governance can limit the global problem of IAS at local, national, and regional scales. We need more integration across efforts at every scale possible to really deal with this threat. Closer collaboration and coordination across sectors and countries. So you can't just deal with this in the Ministry of the Environment. It's got to be forestry's got to be there, trade has to be there, finance has to be there, the legal system has to be there. But also across countries is essential. Information sharing, I'll come back to that. And the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework provides an opportunity for national governments to develop or update approaches. Some of you were probably in Montreal at the CBD, as we were, when the framework was negotiated, right? And invasive alien species are part of that. Next. So we can strengthen policies designed to respond to other threats to biodiversity as well by dealing with IAS, right? And sustainable development goals also. And so we can reduce, we in some cases, for example, invasive alien species have exacerbated forest fires, right? And forest fires in turn are exacerbating global warming, right? So it's just an example, but there are many others where, you know, these chain of events or these positive feedback loops can be broken if we can prevent invasive alien species, which themselves are a cause because they weaken resilience of ecosystems to other invasive alien or biological invasions. Open and interoperable information systems, very important across countries. Everyone has to know what everyone's doing. There's a lot of that now, but it's not as effective as it perhaps it could be. Public awareness, commitment, and engagement and capacity building are crucial, and there's compelling evidence for immediate and sustained action to take place. There are no excuses not to act on this in our views. IPLCs have invaluable knowledge systems that could contribute to addressing biological invasions, yet their lack of land tenure and access rights can limit the extent to which they are able to take action. So that's like an overall conclusion, I think, that we can reach. They need to be partners in co-developing policies and strategies, and while giving consideration to the challenge of conflicting perceptions that I mentioned earlier and values in order to achieve consensus. Participation of IPLCs can be enhanced with sufficient legal, political, and financial support. So successful strategies will respect the rights and including IPLCs, including customary governance systems. And if the impact of invasive alien species and the quality of life is unavoidable, communities need ongoing support and adequate resources to respond to the challenges of living with them. Next. There were some gaps in the knowledge. I won't belabor this, but it's important. We still need more information on trends. We still need more information on Indigenous and local knowledge, values and culture regarding drivers and impacts on land and water. There's a lack of understanding of mechanisms for sharing knowledge among some IPLCs and researchers and others. And in terms of scenarios and models looking forward, in terms of what the developments could be, again, there's the need to bring more knowledge and perceptions of IPLCs into that process as well. Next.
Just to note, we need to go through the next few slides fairly quickly. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, let's do that.
Perfect.
Okay, so let's just keep moving then. Okay, so this is just a poem from Ethiopia that we used, and it gives you an example of how invasive species are in fact affecting culture. And I think we can refer to everyone to the assessment, Peter, maybe, because I think the next few slides are fairly detailed, and if we're short on time, it might be best just to skip ahead.
Yeah, just to say the materials, the link that we shared to you for the materials on this gives much more detail on all of these different examples from the chapters. So this is really just to encourage you towards those materials.
Yeah, okay, because I won't have time to explain these properly, and it's okay. Why don't we just skip ahead so we can start hearing from our participants?
Great. So yeah, so this is just to show you in chapter 2, lots of analysis on impacts. Chapter 3, a lot on policies, governance, and institutions, and on national and international policies and IPLC perspectives on those. In chapter 4, there's a really big review of impacts of invasive alien species for IPLCs, including a contribution on the emerald ash borer that we're going to hear about in a moment, as well as Australia. Chapter 5, looking at site-based and ecosystem-based management programs, case study on removing invasive alien species from small islands, and then also a case study in Kenya, which is really fascinating, discussing how elders are consulted in terms of how to manage invasive alien species. And then chapter 6 also has a lot on these policy options and what governments can be doing and the importance of engagement with Indigenous peoples and local communities. I said there's much more detail on this in the materials that are available online. And there's the link again. Great. So thank you so much, Peter, for giving us that.
My pleasure.
Thank
Thanks
you
for the
so
opportunity.
much. No, thank you. So we hope that gives you an idea of the kind of thing that is the kind of materials and information that is in the assessment. You can see it's a lot of work has gone into it. What's interesting about the summary for policymakers in particular, as Peter said, is that it's been through this process of being discussed and approved by the member states of IPBES. So the kind of messages that are in there about the importance of working with Indigenous peoples and local communities, they have been scrutinized and approved by the governments themselves. So we know a lot of Indigenous peoples, they do find it really useful to have these kind of messages that have come out of this intergovernmental process. Great. So we were then planning to have a discussion with the assessment authors. We are running a little tight on time, but I will pose a couple of the questions that came up in the question and answer here. So I encourage our authors to be listening, and then please do also feel free to write in the question and answer function or in the chat. And our authors will be there listening and will be trying to respond to as many of those questions as possible. So one of the questions that came up in the chat, this was directed to Peter. When we tap into local knowledge, we skate too close to language barriers in terms of comprehending culture, terminology, beliefs, and rituals, all of which could be negatively affected by invasive alien species. How did you and your team address language barriers? And that's from Becca Nissel. I hope I pronounced that properly.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I mean, the reality is that most of the literature that's out there, and most of the literature we reviewed, is in English, and or French probably. And when we had our workshops, we had translations as we do here today, right? But by and large, we were consigned to dealing with a few languages. And you're right, absolutely. You know, that is something that we need to, I think more work needs to be done on, especially in cases with Indigenous peoples where some languages are in danger of going extinct as well, right? So there's a conservation element to that that has to be respected also. But it's a very good question. I can't claim we overcame that barrier. That would be too much.
Excellent. Thank you, Peter. I think a lot of the work in chapter 1, as well as was just presented, looking at, for example, poetry or the way that names are encoding Indigenous and local knowledge, also helped to start exploring these different challenges. There's another question in the chat from Deepika Rawal. I've read that water hyacinth is now a sustainable resource for producing various homewares. I would like to ask why water hyacinth is still an invasive alien species. It's also an interesting question.
I don't know if anyone wants to cover that, but I can. Water hyacinth is very damaging. Basically, it covers entire lakes and river areas that precludes fishing, for example. It suffocates natural vegetation, and in some cases actually harms the ability of fish to reproduce. And I could go on. There are many problems associated with it, why it's still considered, and it's still invasive, regardless of, you know. So yes, it's wonderful to use these species if we can in productive ways. Of course, we should do that. But at the same time, we can't overlook the damage that they can do to local fauna and flora. But my colleagues might want to expand on that. Or
thank you so much for that response, Peter. I don't know if anybody else from the author team wants to respond.
I see Seb is here. Seb, it's certainly an issue, and still an issue in Southern Africa, water hyacinth, isn't it?
Great. So I'm not seeing any more takers for that question. I can see there's also some responses being typed in the chat. So I really encourage our authors to be looking in the chat and also looking in the question and answer function and starting to respond to some of those questions. That'll be very much appreciated. So now we would like to move on to the panel of Indigenous peoples and also members of local communities to also give their reflections, partly on the assessment, but also on their experiences with invasive alien species. So first of all, we have Florence Daguitan from the Philippines. So Florence, if you'd like to take the floor and share your experiences, that would be great. And please do introduce yourself as well. Florence.
Hi. We don't have my slides, Peter.
I did not receive slides.
Oh,
Sorry.
sorry. Okay. Oh, I was supposed, yeah. But anyway, I can do it. I chose, so I have to bring, wait, I'll have to bring my slides, but I cannot share, right?
You may be able to share your screen if you want to.
I can share?
Yes, I think you can try. I can stop sharing mine.
Wait. Sorry. I can't see the share. No, it's okay. I'll just have to, I'll use it as a reference. Wait, but it's really good to see. Share screen. Can my screen be seen?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I'm Florence Daguitan. I'm a Kankanangi Igurut in the Cordillera, Philippines. I work with Tubtuba Foundation and also with Partners for Indigenous Knowledge Philippines. And I'm also a member of the Centers of Distinction for Indigenous Knowledge and Indigenous and Local Knowledge. I would like to share an experience of managing invasive alien species from our community in Piglisan, Sagada. I chose the rice land ecosystem, but before that, it's dominantly very much still very traditional community with 8 land uses, and the forest is still 80% of the land. And a very special ecosystems is the rice land because it's a production area for aquatic, semi-aquatic, and non-aquatic food crops. But it's also a habitat for hundreds of insects, aquatic and semi-aquatic and non-aquatic flora and fauna. So it sustains for every production stage of our rice, we do our rituals and prayers. And so it sustains spirituality and culture of our community. It supplies the community with cereals, vitamins, proteins, minerals, and others. So in the 1990s, we experienced we experienced the invasion of the golden apple snail. This is a very extensive phenomenon in Southeast Asia. I think it has invaded a lot of rice lands in Asia. But in our community, while it took us about a decade to control it, we were able to do it. But when it first came, it has eaten about of the 7 species of snail, 6 of those snails disappeared. It impacts on the rice land by killing it. It eats the rice, the young seedlings. So if we are not able to control it, we have to replant and replant. So it's very bad for the growth performance of rice. But one of the major factor that we were able to successfully control it or manage it is because we still have our rituals that that affects asynchronous activities in the rice land, so that if we are doing the land preparation and picking all the snails during that time, then for some time they will disappear. And so that then we can plant our rice land, so it will not cause so much damage, because it causes damage during the newly planted rice. Now it has become a part of the diet of the people. Fortunately for us, we didn't resort to the use of pesticides, which have been used in the lowland, and it caused a lot more problem. And then it's used as feeds for chicken. And then the women are happy nowadays because they remove the weeds in the rice land, and the women are free from that laborious task. But at present, we are very much, we are also facing another problem. It's a million thread-like worm of worms, also in the rice land. And it's really something that discourages farming, because in the early stage of rice planting, they bury the newly transplanted rice. And then at certain time, and then also, they also causes seepage in the rice land, so that then this will, it will deprive the plant with the irrigation. Nowadays, farmers are doing experimentation by using botanical or plants that they know are poisonous in their environment. But these are in the stage of experimentation. And some are drying the rice lands. Others are reviving the crop rotation, wherein they plant, they dry the rice land for some time and plant non-aquatic plants. And they know very well that the key to success is mobilizing an organized and planned action. But as of this time, they are still in the experimentation stage. We are trying to get help from the academe, but we are still have to be successful on that. So that's our story on invasive alien species. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Florence. And it really helps to show how people can work together as a community to be finding their own solutions to these challenges. Just going to share my screen again. Hopefully this works. There we go. Perfect. Great. And so next we have Lynn Jacobs from Kahnawake in Canada, who's going to talk to us about their experiences with invasive alien species. Lynn, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter. Maybe you could put that one slide up if you have a moment. Thank you. Según se wagwegung guet and wesujats gahnawage ni tgiturung kanyak gehaga dano uzuruni gehani jat doda wagatsanuni agwaga uwani zerade. Hi everyone, my name is Lynn Jacobs, or Guet Danuas. I am from the Mohawk community of Gahnawage, from the Kanyak Gehaga Nation of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. I have been working in my community for the last several decades in environmental land stewardship. And we are located right close to the city of Montreal in Quebec, in what is known as Canada today. So we are a fairly urban, a community that has a lot of urban issues around us. And so we do have many invasive alien species affecting our community, including Phragmites, which are greatly affecting our wetlands, and also the emerald ash borer, which is what I will speak to you very briefly about today. I was grateful to participate in the assessment and to provide some text for a short case study on the emerald ash borer, along with my colleague Edgar Blanchette, who is Abenaki and was not able to be present today. So the emerald ash borer, which is pictured on this slide, is a beetle that is native to Asia, and it was first detected in Canada in the early 2000s in the Great Lakes region, and it's believed that it probably arrived in Canada from maybe from shipping of ash wood and ash materials from the ash tree, maybe in the late 1990s, mid 1990s. It spread very quickly from the Great Lakes region outwards, and is now located in 5 provinces and continuing to move. And it spreads by flying, but also by the transportation of firewood from ash trees and other ash materials. So this beetle feeds very specifically on the ash trees. In my community, we have the black ash, which is a very culturally important tree, and I'll explain that in a moment, the red or green ash, and the white ash tree. And so the emerald ash borer will lay their eggs on the bark of the tree, and then the larvae will bore underneath the bark where it feeds on the water and nutrients. And it creates these sort of S-shaped grooves as it moves down the tree. And eventually, as there's more and more in the tree, it will girdle the tree and prevent the movement of water and nutrients, and then the tree will die. And then the adults will emerge and create a very distinctive D-shaped hole in the tree, which is how you know that the tree is infested, and they will continue to feed on other ash trees in the area. In our community, we have many ash forests, and we've been monitoring the situation for since the early 2000s. Putting up traps to understand the population in the community and how it's moving, how it's impacting the ash trees. And we've seen a very significant loss of ash trees in our community. The black ash tree is very culturally significant to us, as are the other ash trees as well. But the black ash specifically has a very unique characteristic that if you soak the log and then you pound it, it can be separated along its annual growth rings to create splints that can be used for weaving. So it's used in our traditional weaving practices and arts, and you could see a basket represented here that is an Abenaki basket. And I have some here as well, just to show. In the Mohawk culture, we create different types of baskets for corn washing, for gathering berries, for gathering medicines, pack baskets. And this one here is actually was my wedding basket. So we use it for during the wedding ceremony, where the husband and the wife will put in the basket the materials that represent what they're bringing to the marriage, and these baskets are exchanged during our traditional wedding ceremonies. So the black ash is very significant in our community, and then also for the handles as well. Sometimes we'll use the white or the green ash. So the loss of the ash tree in our communities and many other nations as well that have this basket making tradition is very, very significant. Not only is there a loss of the species, but there's also a loss of all of the cultural practices around bringing the young people out into the forest to learn how to select the ash tree for the basket making. Also, all of the language that is tied to the preparation, the harvesting of the tree, the preparation of the splints, the weaving of the baskets, all of the language around that is also at risk of being lost as we lose this species. And so one of the things that we spoke about in our case study is that the response, sometimes the policy response from a country doesn't necessarily reflect the rights of the Indigenous peoples that are dealing with this situation and are monitoring and using Indigenous science to address the situation. In Canada, the policy response was to recommend that the black ash tree be listed under the Species at Risk Act, which would then result in restrictions for Indigenous peoples being able to harvest the tree. So unfortunately, this policy response does not save the species because the emerald ash borer is the cause of the loss, not the harvesting by Indigenous peoples. And in fact, if we don't harvest the trees before they die and dry out, we can't use it for basket making anymore, and the tree will just die and not have been used. So our community and other communities like the Abenaki, other nations have been working with the Canadian government trying to convey that the policy response has not been appropriate, and there has been dialogue around this, trying to figure out what the next steps could be around addressing the issue of the emerald ash borer. So that's what I wanted to present today, and just to have an understanding of a lot of the invasive species that are affecting our communities are having not only impacts from an environmental perspective and an economic perspective, but also from a cultural perspective. And we need to work together with the different levels of government within our communities, provincially, nationally, et cetera, and internationally as well, to try to figure out the best responses to address these issues. So I thank you very much for your attention. Nyawakowa.
Thank you so much, Lynn. It was great to have you contributing to Chapter 4 of the assessment, and fascinating to hear again here, just the sheer range of impacts that an invasive alien species can have on the community's culture, and then also the challenges that come in around policy responses and that need for a collaboration and mutual understanding. So thank you so much for that. Next, I believe Onel was not able to join us, unfortunately. So I will pass the floor to Paulina Shulbeva, please.
Hi, thanks, Peter. Can you share my presentation, please?
Yes.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm already speaking about in previous our meeting about different invasive alien species in Siberia and northern territory of Russia, but you can read this in our report. We send the link through the chat. But today I wanted to speak about this beautiful animal. It's a raccoon dog. Raccoon dog, it's invasive alien species in Siberia now. Next slide, please. First of all, raccoon dog, they have native area and introduction area. Native area, it's Japan, Korea, China, and Far East of Russia. It's Far East of Russia. It's a northern border of this species. In 13th and 15th of last century, previous century, they was introduced to Europe countries, Eastern Europe especially. And as a result, this animal, this raccoon dog, they actively breed and spread, and now living in Romania, Poland, France, Sweden, Estonia, Finland. In Finland, as example, every year, 200,000 these animals killed only on a in a road by car because they spread very fast. Next slide, please. But like you see in this map, in Siberia, Antarctic, this is nothing. We don't have this species. It's not our species, especially in cold Siberia. Yes, thank you. Next slide, please. What is a species? It's very interesting because it's not a raccoon, it's not a dog, it's a raccoon dog, as everybody sees the pictures. And this is a species, they live in very mild climate. He not like it cold or hot temperature of weather. He prefers stay in one territory as long as possible. He not nomad. Living with like a families or permanent pairs. It's very interesting because they monogams. They really have a like family for all life. And the male bring food for female in a puppy time period. And provide food not just for you, for himself and for his female, but also for puppies. As you see, he said he have very short legs, therefore, and it's not raccoon again. He not climb to the trees because of the short legs. He not like it snow. I mean, big snow like in Siberia. But he eating everything, and this is a big problem because he love very mild climate, and he love eggs of the birds, especially ground nesting bird's egg, and birds also, not just eggs. It's just one species of dog family who have hibernate for the winter time because of the coldness, and therefore they're not coming to Siberia before, because in Siberia we have 6 or 8 months period of winter time, and if he like go into hibernate to sleeping for 7 months, he's dead. He not wake up because his maximum period for sleeping 3 months. Therefore we don't have before, but now it's a climate change coming, and this species already coming to Siberia, to central part of Siberia. Around 5 years ago, we first time saw him in my territory, especially. Next slide, please. As you see on the pictures, they coming to already. It's our spring snow, but temperature is +2. And they wake up, it's coming to the garden in the Vasugan wetland, indigenous villages. Is it also indicator of climate change? How visibility of climate change? Because of period of cold weather, now it's very short period. We have a lot of days with temperature -2, -5, and this is a raccoon dog. He in hibernate, but if it's -5, he can wake up and going to try to find the food. We know it because we try to communicate and domesticate with looking at how we can work with this species. And it was very interesting because some our hunters, they think they died because he not like he not doing, like he's sleeping, but he thinks that he died, and next day he wake up because temperature was -2, -20, it was -2. Yes, and our summer now and autumn period is very long, warm. For the understanding, Vasugan, it's the biggest wetland in the northern hemisphere. It's more than all territory of France. It's a wetland in bogs. And as I showing before, this is perfect place for raccoon dog if the climate will be growing up, because it's a lot of food. It's a place for migratory birds. It's a Ramsar territory. a lot of native duck, different ground nesting birds, and frogs, mouses, bears, mushrooms, everything, rodents, and of course, raccoon dog very happy be here when they come in. Our hunters find that they destroyed a lot of nests, very important for us, birds, as a duck, as example, just because they play, not because he's hungry. And this is a big problem. But he loves water and he loves swamp. It's very comfortable for raccoon dog territory. Next slide, please. And what we try to do, our hunters, we all, of course, we started thinking what we should do with this, how we can domesticate or how we can connect with this animal. We develop new knowledge. It's also very interesting practice now. We make warm house for raccoon dog, like a for normal hunting dogs, but we try separate these two species because we don't know what raccoon dog, what maybe they have some viruses. Our hunting dog, like a Siberian Lyca, can die if they communicate each other together. We temporarily put on the chain this species and give him food twice per day, like 6 months or 1 year. After this, we like let them go, but they beg for the food because of free food. And it was interesting period when we try to understand how we can communicate with this species, because some species, some raccoon dogs just gone, some beg because they already know that this is like a warm home, this is food, this is his territory, and they try to protect his territory around, it's like 500 to 2 kilometers, 500 meters to 2 kilometers. He try protect from another raccoon dog family. It's very interesting. And he stop and destroy the nets if he has food and if he has another like activities. And also we can try control the breeding, of course, because he have many puppies. But we understand fully that we can't control and management and monitor all territory of Vasugan wetland, and especially in all Siberia, because it's impossible. It's millions of hectares and not so many indigenous villages. We just started the first step for understanding, getting to know the species and trying to interact and develop understanding for ourselves. What future with this raccoon dog will be in our territory. And we also hope that predators, big predators like wolves or owl, helping to control the numbers in our territory. Yes, thank you. Next, I think it's all. No, next slide, please. If we have a time, it's just 30 seconds that you should understand that raccoon dog, it's not a dog. Listen in his things, please. He like a bird, or yeah, he like a bird. His voice, it's, yes, thank you. It's absolutely not the voice of dog. It's like a bird or like a cat. Next video, please. Only 30 seconds also. Next slide. Next slide.
This fluffy bandit strikes terror in the hearts of every small creature it meets. It's a tireless hunter whose belly is a hunger-fueled bottomless pit and whose domain is constantly expanding. Or is it an adorable magical creature who has charmed the hearts of millions? This cutie has many faces, and they're all masked. This is the raccoon dog.
You can saw all this video on YouTube, but very important that you understand that raccoon dog it's a predator, and to try now understand how we can communicate together. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that example with us, Polina. It's really interesting to see how the communities are trying to approach developing a relationship with the new species. So yeah,
Yes.
thank you. Fascinating,
Thank you.
fascinating example. And hopefully we'll have some time to discuss these things in a moment. Next, I want to pass the floor over to Gathuru, who is going to talk to us about some of the examples of invasive alien species in Kenya. Gathuru, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for inviting me to this forum. I want to talk about one of those invasive species that we have in Kenya, one that was introduced in Kenya a long time ago, and that is eucalyptus species, which is an evergreen flowering tree and shrub, which is native to Australia. And in Kenya, it has spread to almost all the corners of the country. It was introduced around 1902, and when it came to where I come from, that is in the central part of Kenya, the experiences that my community had with it showed that it was taking up a lot of water. And since in most cases, local indigenous and local people relate with their local environment through experience and observation, so they observed that it was taking a lot of water, and so they gave it the name Monyua Mae in our local dialect, which actually means a tree that guzzles water. So it's a description of what their observation was. And in Kiswahili, the tree was given the name Mtibao, which means a tree that gives wood. So now, given those two issues, one is the tree is good because it's giving people wood, and the other one, the tree is not as good because it's a water guzzler, then that has given actually even the Kenya government a challenge in how to manage that species. I may want to say that it's a fast-growing tree, and it has a very high copicing ability. And it has a wide range of products, so that makes it very attractive to people. Also, its capacity to regulate water consumption, because where there is a lot of water, then it takes up a lot of water, and when there is little, it takes in little. That is according to science. I said that it was introduced in Kenya in 1902. That time, the colonial government had the objective of providing energy to the locomotive, but it was later used by the same people for a different reason. Because they were settling in the good places like the highlands, also in Nairobi area, there are some places where they liked, but they were marshlands. So they brought in this species, the eucalyptus species. Of course, we understand there are so many species of eucalyptus, but they brought in some of those species so that they can reclaim the marshlands, and they did it so well. In some of the parts in Nairobi, some places called Karen, they were marshlands, but today it's the leaders of this country who stay there because the area is very well reclaimed. And other areas around the country, they used that species to reclaim the marshlands where they wanted to occupy. So we've seen over time the impacts of eucalyptus on the environment. Some of them are actually on environment and people. Some of these impacts are positive and others are negative. Some of the positive ones, they have good financial returns because of the diverse products which we have mentioned earlier on, like quailwood, timber. They also provide building materials, pulp, ornaments, etc. They also provide household firewood and timber. They are also good for industrial production, especially wrapping paper, cardboards, and they are also easing pressure on forests due to provision of alternative source of firewood. And in some areas, it is used as weed brick. But the negative impacts are more compared to the positives, because we've seen huge tracts of indigenous forests being brought down so that we can have plantations of eucalyptus. It consumes a lot of water, as we have said earlier, and it quickly reduces soil moisture compared to indigenous trees. That is even proven scientifically. And it has also been shown that in areas where eucalyptus has been introduced, no other crops can do well. And their introduction actually depletes food and shelter for animals and birds. It also affects humus on soil, makes soil to be unstable, and so it has all those negative impacts. And the way it's being managed in Kenya, it's actually through policy and also through government directives. We also, at the moment, we have two tiers of government, the national and the county governments, and both of them are giving directives not to plant eucalyptus in the forest and on water catchment areas, in wetlands, etc. They are also giving directives of putting in place policies that guide on how to remove eucalypts from riparian reserves, which means that even the government itself has now understood that this aliens, invasive species, it has impacts on water. Our National Forestry Research Institution has also given guidelines on different types of eucalyptus species and where to plant them, including guidelines on how to plant them. But we also find that there are individual initiatives by people themselves who are finding the species being too much on their farms because it's affecting the soil and also crop production. So individual farmers are also having their own initiatives to remove the species from their farms, and sometimes setting up woodlots so that they can separate the species from the farms. But we also find that there is quite a lot of agitation, especially by the civil society, which are requesting the government to sort of remove these species from the said wetlands and water catchment areas, including forests. So there is a lot of campaign happening at the moment, even though this is being impeded by different interests from different groups. And so the recommendations that have been given so far, these are the recommendations coming from especially the indigenous and local communities. One is that the researchers should provide more balanced information, which is informed by bold and impartial research. This has actually been guided by the fact that when you talk with researchers, some of them say, yes, the species actually takes up a lot of water, and others say no, even other species do take water. So you cannot actually say it's only eucalyptus that takes up water. So we need researchers to give us authentic information, bold that is coming from bold and impartial research, and not guided by interests. And we also recommend that researchers should continue researching, and especially on potential alternatives with related economic gains and restorative ecological impacts, and especially those that are indigenous. We have one like Macamia lutea, which also copies pretty well, but not a lot of research has been done on it. So we need more of these so that we can sort of slowly, progressively replace. And also using available information and policy instruments, the IPLCs should also continue removing eucalyptus from riparian areas so that their areas are not do not continue being destroyed by the species. And we are also recommending that the government, or the two tiers of government, should actually follow expert guidelines and very purposefully remove all eucalyptus species from wetlands, riparian reserves, and water catchment areas. It's we find that in some water catchment areas, highland forests, we still have sections of these planted with eucalyptus, and we are experiencing a lot of shifts and dynamics in river water volumes where water is actually becoming reduced. And we also do have government directives that are in place which need to be followed thoroughly. I'm talking about Kenya. We need to have them followed very clearly, because if we did, I think we do not need more policies or directives. We have enough. Only that perhaps I think I would call this it's sort of government inertia. They've not been very active in implementing some of them. But if they did, then some of the challenges that we are experiencing with these species would actually be addressed. And then finally, it's very, very important that controversy that is surrounding these species, it needs to be addressed pretty soon, because and with good information, because when you get information from different government institutions about the same species and it's conflicting, then that sometimes it doesn't assist the local indigenous and the local people properly to make informed decisions on how to relate with certain species. So if we can have that, at least that addressed, it will be very, very helpful to the indigenous and local communities, so that even as people continue planting and embracing new varieties, then they embrace ones that, or those that are not going to have adverse impacts on their local environments. Thank you so much.
Many thanks, Gathuru, for providing us with that example. We had some questions in the chat about which eucalyptus species you're discussing in particular. I don't know if you could share that with us. Perhaps you didn't hear the question, Gathuru. We were asking which eucalyptus species you're discussing in particular. There was a question in the chat. Okay, I'm not hearing from Gathuru on that, but hopefully we can get back to you all on it. So thanks so much, Gathuru, for sharing that example with us. That's the end of our panel for now. I think it's been really fascinating. You can hear the different approaches and perceptions around invasive alien species. So this idea of perceptions of how indigenous peoples are approaching invasive alien species. For example, Polina's example, which seems more mixed as opposed to Lynn's experiences in Kanawake, or Florence's experiences in the Philippines, or Gathuru's experiences in Kenya. And also really hearing about the impacts and then the different ways that indigenous peoples are managing invasive alien species. And then also the way that that is coming into contact and into play with government policies. And it's also been great to see so much discussion in the chat as well. So if you haven't been looking in the chat, I really encourage you to do that. I can see that Hannah was talking also about invasive alien species fish in Lake Victoria and highlighting that that's a huge issue. Eunice was highlighting that Prosopis juliflora, if I pronounced that right, is also a huge issue in Kenya. And I know that there's lots of examples and discussions of that in the assessment itself. So that is in some of those materials online. And also Tarsila was saying eucalyptus is also an issue in the Andes of Peru. So yeah, just thank you so much to all of our panelists for sharing those examples with us. We had a few requests to also share some experiences. I don't know, Handain, if you're available online now, I can give you the floor so that you can also share your experiences. I'm pressing that now. So hopefully that will work for you if you're able to come online now.
Oui, bonjour.
Bonjour, we can hear you.
Oui.
Hello, we
Okay.
can hear you.
Okay, merci beaucoup pour
Thank you very much for this webinar. It is very helpful for Indigenous peoples. I want to shout out to my brothers and sisters, panelists, the organizers. I'd like to make a small contribution to this debate. Talking about 6 million invasive alien species. We don't know if this is a very. We know this is a very serious scourge, and it is the third most important factor in terms of the degradation of biodiversity. This is something we must know. It's important. And the economic costs associated with the control of these invasive alien species are also enormous. Economic losses amount to 5% of the world economy, $1.4 billion a year, or 3 times the GDP, the annual GDP of Africa. This was first noted in 2004. It means that invasive alien species constitute an issue for indigenous peoples and their cultures. And we have a number of examples. I can just present one that was noted in Morocco, which I'm very familiar with. We have our traditional cows, which have disappeared because of the import of European cows. And as a result, we have greatly participated in increasing climate change from the impacts of agriculture and the raising of these types of cows. So this means that we have to be careful, and I would suggest that IPBES propose the creation of centers of control for control with the participation of indigenous peoples, national committees for the control of invasive alien species. These committees should be created in collaboration with indigenous peoples, and I think we will diminish the impacts of invasive alien species by doing so.
This is just a proposition, but as an indigenous group, we have lost a lot of produce. We have lost traditional grain that's very important, and we've lost several cultures. On top of all of this, we have noticed in the last few years that the invasive species are intercontinental, such as birds. We have lost certain bird species that because of invasive species that have chased away partridge and indigenous and traditional partridge to the region. These are very complicated issues, and we have propositions on which we can discuss, and we can talk about this. Thank you for this very, very important webinar.
Great. Thank you so much, Handain, for sharing those experiences and also those recommendations as well. And I think this kind of mechanism is also something that the assessment was exploring. I don't know if any of the authors have any reflections or any comments they want to give at this stage on anything that they've heard. We're moving into our last minutes of the webinar. So if anybody has any last reflections, that would be great to hear. While we're waiting, just give you a moment to think about that, authors. So there are some questions in the chat and in the question and answer. A lot of them are being answered as they go along, which is great. And you can see there are these questions around perceptions of invasive alien species. So what if invasive alien species have medicinal impacts, and different ways that indigenous peoples might be viewing invasive alien species? So I think those are really fascinating questions, and they were really dug into in the first chapter of the assessment, really looking at what makes a species invasive and how can this be considered, but also recognizing that different groups will have different perceptions on this. I just had one more question in the question and answer, which is to Paulina. So I hope Paulina can come online if possible. So Anu Rai was asking, he said, thank you for the amazing presentation. Could you please elaborate on the development of new knowledge as a control measure, and why do you think this is important? Don't know if Paulina, if you're able to give any reflections on why it's important to be developing new knowledge.
Thank you so much for the questions, and Peter, thank you. I think it's very, very important because our traditional knowledge, it's not just stop it. It's not just what we have like 100 years ago. No, traditional knowledge, if we're looking at the climate change or something on our territory, new species, we are, as indigenous people, so we're very adopted. But does it mean we also evaluated, and our knowledge also, and our language also? As example, it's not just only knowledge. This is species coming, we don't have names in our own indigenous languages for this species. Does it mean we should develop this? knowledge, language, everything. And it's very, very, very important. I'm 100% sure that every indigenous peoples, and they develop new knowledge every day, or they develop new knowledge during the generation. Knowledge of my generation is a little bit different than knowledge of my mom. It's all traditional. But yes, it's very, very important not stop it and be part of the progress also, or be part of the situation. If you not lose something like in our, I'm sorry, maybe I already talked many minutes, but if you not lose and lost some birds in our territory now in the situation with raccoon dog, we should develop new knowledge, communicate and control. We're thinking now that raccoon dogs, for his behaviors, it's like a cat. It's not like a dog, and maybe we can use this before we try kill or this species. We should try communicate with this species. Choose the new knowledge. I think this is very important. Yeah, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for that response, Paulina. I think it's a brilliant example of how Indigenous local knowledge can respond to new situations and maintain its dynamism. So that's brilliant. Thank you so much. We only have 4 minutes left. I'm wondering if there's any final reflections from any of the authors or anybody on the panel. They'll have to be fairly brief. But now is your opportunity to take the floor, if you wish. Peter, please.
Thank you, and thank you so much for all these very interesting presentations. And just to pick up on the last point that was made, I think the transmission of traditional knowledge is a very important topic. I'm hoping the assessment can make a contribution to that, but it'll be a small one overall. What we need is much more, I think, work on this on a global basis, and we need repositories of traditional knowledge as well, so that this is captured in the best way possible, working with the people who actually hold that knowledge, not anthropologists that are coming in from outside, but generating it from within. So really important, I think, point that we need to know what people know, basically. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Peter. Anybody else from the panel, either the authors or from the Indigenous panel? Any final reflections? Okay, I'm not seeing any. So I think we can wrap up there. We have 2 minutes to go. So from my side, I just want to say a big thank you to all of our panelists, both the authors of the assessment and the members of Indigenous peoples and local communities who've shared such interesting and rich examples with us today. I think it really helps to show that this is a very complicated subject with lots of different actors, and it really shows the importance of Indigenous peoples and local communities and their knowledge for really helping to manage and deal with these situations, but also the need for that communication with governments and others who may be either helping or hindering efforts to manage invasive alien species at the community level. As we said, the materials are all available online. The idea is that the assessment can be a tool for decision makers, including Indigenous peoples and local communities, and that those messages that are in there show the results of a lot of work, a lot of analysis, a lot of collaboration between the scientific community, Indigenous peoples and local communities, and to an extent governments as well. So the hope is that those materials, they can be useful for you. So if you do find those useful and you are using them in any way, please do drop us a line as well. Like, please do let us know. It's always really interesting to hear how the materials are being used. So with that, I'm happy to close the webinar. We also want to say a big thank you to the interpreters for doing such a great job. We know it's not easy interpreting, I'm not even speaking properly, interpreting when lots of people are speaking and sharing a lot of information. So you've done an amazing job. So we just want to thank you all for that. And yeah, on that note, we're just very happy to say thank you to everybody. Wishing you all good mornings or good afternoons or good days, depending on where you are in the world. And yeah, just thank you very much. And we hope to connect with you all soon in different ways. So thank you so much and take care. Goodbye.